that health insurance to even cover those necessary services.
Sarah, let's make sure that people understand the difference between a government program that brings the financing in and the regulations in, but they do not, the doctors do not work for the government. The hospitals are not paid directly, by the government. So in England, all of the healthcare system reports to the government. Here, the financing goes out, and then, there is competition among all of the providers and that sort of thing. So it is not totally socialist. England has the only socialist healthcare system in the world. Many more of the countries have things that kind of combine. Some of them even work with health insurances, but they are highly regulated by the central government and what they can do and that they can't do and how much profit they can make. Just to make sure everybody kind of understands that.
In England,
that's one of the things you hear. This is socialism.
Yes, that would be like a national health insurance, basically, way of seeing it. And private health insurance providing duplicate health coverage services under the Medicare for All bill would be prohibited, but this would ultimately save us $400 to $500 billion a year wasted due to profits taken by insurance companies and hospitals. Also, the money they use in advertisements and in administrative costs. So we would no longer need all that administration staff arguing with insurance companies for approval of some type of treatment or service. And then moving to a single-payer system would also give us more freedom from job lock when someone wants to leave a job but cannot risk being without the benefits of their company or organization. I know Roseanne was talking a little bit about that in her life. A single-payer healthcare system would be a major boost to entrepreneurship, new small businesses, and this would give us more worker flexibility and mobility. Studies show that 15 to 20% would seek other opportunities than their current job if they didn't have to worry about losing their health benefits. And we also believe that Medicare for All would be great for unions, because unions would no longer need to negotiate health care benefits like they do year after year. They can get back to negotiating wages, pensions, and working conditions and focus on these, which are much needed in our current economic system. And HR 676, which is the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill in the House, has been endorsed by 633 labor unions. So some of the staffers at Stavenow's office have said that we need to get the unions on board as one of their, but they're already on board, so that's a good point to know.
What we have to do is get them telling her.
Right, yeah.
Do you get, just a question, do you know in particular which unions are biggest in Staten here? It's got to be UAW.
Yeah, I think the UAW.
Actually, most of them are. Even the teachers' unions have been more and more on board on it, and the retirees. I spoke to the retiree teacher union just this past week. They're totally on board on all of that. So I think we underestimate the number of unions that are,
I think to clarify the question, I think maybe he's asking which union Stabenow leans on the most for like that she listens to.
I think the UAW.
And they're against.
well, I think that so they are for their national body voted just recently to endorse Medicare for All, but in my conversations with a lot of the people in the sort of Michigan Democratic Party who are very close to the UAW, I think there's a lot of hesitation. They still don't trust it, and there's certain ways in which I feel like UAW is more conservative right here in Michigan than it is nationally. Now I could be reading that incorrectly, but I think that that's one of the next steps, and what we need to do is to talk to them here in Michigan.
The issue for the unions is that many of them have very fine benefits, and they don't understand if they will be losing or not losing, and that's our job to help them to understand that, you know, they shouldn't be losing, they should be gaining. And so that's the thing that, you know, they've always considered their things Cadillac, especially in the UAW, and they are. But, and certainly some of the teachers' unions and have been able to negotiate excellent health care. But you look at what they're getting, and it's in the, so, and the ease of use and everything, you know, many of them are very frustrated in accessing and trying to get it from the, whatever insurance company is running there. The Viva has worked pretty well for the unions, but it isn't an issue of we love the Viva. We want health care that is the same or better than what we have. That's the issue, and we shouldn't get sidetracked by people trying to tell us it's something else. David, would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. The issues are
He's a doctor,
pretty
actually a
straightforward.
neurologist.
The UAW has supported single payer going back to the 90s. That isn't the issue. The problem is what forces, what resources will they put behind it? And the reason that they don't put major resources behind it is because they already have healthcare through their negotiated contracts. What we have to point out to them is that this is constantly being chipped away at in negotiations. And if they take the long view, they really want to push for single payer so that that's taken off the bargaining table as an issue and they can talk about wages and working conditions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's not so much that they're conservative, it's that they have other issues that they're working on. They feel that healthcare they're taken care of. And again, there are two different models of unionism. One is social unionism, where you're looking at the general welfare. The other is business unionism, where you look at basically serving your clients, which are your union members. And we want to reinforce or try to push a social unionism perspective. That's what I would say.
I would just, one thing that I'm not advised, but as a member of the UAW, there's just, when talking to them, there's some issues right now. There's a lot of corruption and there are actually multiple higher up members of the UAW being investigated by the FBI for various issues. So it's just something to keep in mind when talking with them. Literally don't know if how much longer they'll be in charge. So just something to keep in mind, that if you're talking to a couple individuals, or if you're trying to talk to as a whole, if there's a big, you know, upheaval within the leadership, which there's some movings here and there for, that it might not be there, who knows, a year from now, a couple years from now. So just a kind of heads up. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Does anyone else have anything to say, like, in regard to the unions? Yeah.
Well, just to follow up on there with social unionism, I mean, one of our dilemmas is, the private sector unions, including the UAW, continue to shrink. And they know that, and we know that, and we sort of have to get across to them that if they want to continue to be relevant, or if we're going to rebuild the union movement in this country, it's got to have more of a sense of we're making this fight for our neighbors, for our relatives, and that's how the UAW was built in the 30s. You know, it was not a sort of single interest, or we're taking care of our own kind of thing, but it was for everybody, and we need to get back to that.
Right. Yeah.
I think you guys should tack on there that it's good for contractors and kind of freelance workers as well.
Yes, and people who own their own businesses that don't have to worry about where their health care is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that the farmers were telling us when we were organizing them, is that they're almost all married to somebody else who has a job at Ford or the University of Michigan or something, so that they can, otherwise there's no way, with doing dangerous work like farming and especially contracting, that you can go for very long without having any health care. And if you're going to be paying $20,000 a year out of pocket, for a plan, I mean, for some contractors maybe, but for most farmers, no way can they afford that. Then on top of it, you have the problem of your employees, which I'm sure you can speak to, which is that, you don't get people sticking around for very long. People want to get a job with benefits for themselves. If you can't pay them, you're constantly retraining people. You can never, keep them around, or can't keep good people around. So.
Also,
Yeah.
just, it's worth including that contracting and construction work is like the most dangerous, most lethal job in this country.
Oh,
People
yeah.
get crushed in trenches and by falling walls.
Fall off roofs.
Debris all the time, so.
So when you say contractors, you're meaning independent folks doing tech work and everything else, right?
Yeah, or, construction workers,
Yeah.
skilled trade
Like,
laborers.
that we're all, or like Uber drivers are now independent contractors.
Right.
And we have to remember to really work on this idea that the unions were founded on common good and community, taking care of each other. We have lost that in America. We somehow morphed into something where me first, I take care of me and my family, and, I don't want to pay for you. And I think that we need to also have messages that bring us back, because healthcare for all is a large part of that. If we don't win that battle, there's a lot, and the same thing for schools and everything else. I want my school good, but I don't want to pay for yours. And if we're ever going to do inequity, it always is a reallocation of some resources to try to beam people up. Rich people will never have any problem getting their needs met, but at what expense?
But we'll have a stronger workforce if we cover everybody, and a stronger population and country as a whole. So I feel like that could get some people on board if we focus on that too. Okay, I'm gonna on to the next. And this is what we were talking about that a little bit. Like switching to a Medicare for all would be beneficial for employers because healthier people are more productive economically. And productivity losses linked to absenteeism cost employers an average of $225.8 billion annually in the U.S. So focus on prevention and get health will cut these costs. And also over 60% of bankruptcies are due to medical costs. I think it's even higher now actually. These are people who can't get or have increased barriers in getting car loans, home loans, or student loans, putting them even further behind than they were in the first place. And providers, is that the same one?
It's okay. Something I've noticed about these two talking points is that they're very similar but nuanced in a different way.
Yeah.
That it's good for employers that a healthier workforce is more productive, but also a key point to remember is how much employers really are kicking in for their workers right now. I think Eli said it's something like an average of $11,000 for a worker with a family of 4.
Yeah, now it's like 14.
And they
Yeah, it's
also have to
14.
hire staff in order to argue with the insurance companies in their
You have to
human
go to the
resources
coordinator.
department.
Certainly.
When you talk to those folks, they spend a lot of time trying to get people the services and the benefits that they're paying for.
Yeah, I think it's something like half of the work of HR departments is coordinating benefits. Now, and a lot of that's just people who get hired, leave the job. That creates a whole lot of paperwork every time. This is of course, if you're lucky enough to work at a company that has benefits. And then it's this enrolling, unenrolling, changing status. It's all it's a ton of work, and there'd still be some work for HR, obviously, but the amount of money that employers spend is outrageous. I just wanted to say one thing here about the Yousef Rabhi bill. He senses there's a little bit of a danger here, a little bit of a trap. If you can see where this is going, it might turn out to be a giant windfall for corporations like Ford or Quicken, or you think of some of the biggest companies here that do provide benefits, where you're taking the out-of-pocket burden away from us.
You mean like the tax reform bill?
Yeah. Well, that's the other argument, is that there's plenty of money now. And this is actually also linked to the Rabhi bill. This is why they have to keep changing it, because events keep changing. But basically, the first point, if you take this away, you are saving, a company like Ford or a company like, let's say, Quicken, that doesn't have a unionized force, something, on the order of an average of, $6,000 per employee or $7,000 per employee per year. So you're saving them.
They will be taxed.
Right. Well, that's the thing. So that Robbie is building the legislation so that the taxes will replace most of that. There's still going to be some savings for like a Quicken or or something like that, but it's not going to be a windfall that's supported by taxpayers, even if the
And
tax.
the national programs also have that.
Right. So I know that's a very nuanced point, but when you get down the road to this, it might strike you as like, wait a second, we're removing all these taxes from these big corporations that can absolutely pay for it. They will pay for it. One of the other things too, though, what Margie mentioned with the tax reform bill, before, it was really hard to talk about sources of revenue for a state single payer. Where are we going to get the money? And we still will need to change the Constitution to be able to do progressive taxation and remove the limit on revenue that we can take in as a state. We can do that. If we can do voters, not politicians, and promote the vote, we can do this in 2020. But there's also now all this money that the rich just got a hell of a lot richer in Michigan. So like corporations, wealthy people, they repealed the estate tax, right? And so now we can impose our own estate tax in Michigan. So, there's a lot of sources of income here that don't fall directly on average people, in part because it's the ironic result of what they're doing in Washington. Sorry for the tangent.
No, that's good.
And then my last quick point on employers, that's less wonky, but I feel still really important because it's one that was trotted out when the ACA got passed, which is, I'm not in this business to give my workers health care. I want to be a woodworker. I want to work on cars or whatever it is, so employers would be free to focus on the business that they intended to start rather than having to pay their HR department to administer health care for their workers.
Well, I don't know if you're the best one to answer this, but I'm surprised there's not a subset on, like, I like the CEO from the EpiPen, how much he made last year. It seems like, in terms of the pharmaceutical industry and everything else, but Bernie did really well in Michigan going after the 1%, or, he's done pretty well on 1% since then, and to have some sort of subset on that in terms of how they're just raking it in, or on the Oxy, what's the name of the company that's just made, granted they've financed museums and everything else, right? But it just seems like 3 or 4 of those bullet points for talking points, or even in Michigan,
Yes.
2 or 3 companies that have made tons of money, having that, at least as DSA, I'd like to see that as part of our package of when we talk to people.
There's
Yeah,
an available
that'd be
slide at the
great.
end.
There's
too,
a slide.
for Physicians for National Health Program is compiled. It was an image of like 6 to 8 CEOs and what they've been
Yeah,
making.
top health insurance companies, but we could also have one like about pharmaceutical companies too.
And medical device companies too.
Yeah.
And the fact is now hospitals are buying physicians groups, nursing homes, all sorts of things, that they are doing that, and then all the money goes out.
So anybody else? So switching to a single payer system would allow healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, dentists to focus on patient care again instead of trying to spending almost 40% of their time dealing with paperwork and challenging insurance company denials and trying to get reimbursed for certain services. So a lot of providers should be on board too. Eric mentioned the Physicians for National Health Program, which is a nationwide organization that's been working on Medicare for All for a while as well. And use of a Medicare for All provided health chip card, which would contain medical records and immediate reimbursement to the provider, would mean that doctors and hospitals would no longer have to bill any insurance companies, and this would massively reduce administrative overhead costs for doctors and hospitals. And we believe Medicare for All would be the most efficient and least expensive way to deliver health care for everyone. The U.S. multi-payer healthcare system is inefficient. We spend far more than any other developed country on healthcare. In 2016, our country spent $3.2 trillion on healthcare expenditures, And the Medicare for All Act, like I said earlier, is estimated to cost $1.4 trillion. So we're already saving just in that way and cutting out all that overhead. And the U.S. has worse health outcomes than other developed nations with universal health care. So some people say the U.S. is the best healthcare system, but how can you say that when we have poor health outcomes? And this can be traced to lack of affordable access to preventative treatments. And as you can see, the average life expectancy for U.S. citizens living in is lower here than those living in countries with universal health care like Germany, the UK, Canada, France, Sweden, and Italy. And our infant mortality rate is also higher. We have more infant deaths per 1,000 live births than countries with universal health care like Canada, France, Germany, Australia, Italy, and Sweden. And we have over 2 times the infant mortality rate as Sweden, as you can see, and almost 2 times that of Italy. And our maternal mortality rate is shamefully high compared to Canada, France, UK, Germany, and Australia, over 5 times the rate of France and UK, Germany, Australia, so those 4 countries.
It's something where you really see the lack of preventative
Sure.
care.
And if I could just say
Right.
real quick, the way that I always frame this to people is every time a Canadian mother dies in childbirth, 5 American mothers are dying in
And
childbirth.
that's insane.
Yeah.
We also must acknowledge the racial and ethnic disparities we see in healthcare. We know Black and brown mothers account for a greater proportion of maternal death rates. I think there was a new piece in ProPublica that was saying that Black mothers die at 12 times the rate of white mothers in New York. So big problems there. And this is, I think, the last, the second to last. A single payer system would be most efficient and least expensive way to deliver health care for all. Only by enlarging to the largest possible pool can the risk and expenses be spread widely enough to eliminate cost sharing, those co-pays and deductibles. Having the largest possible pool would also allow for huge renegotiation of drug and equipment prices, and health insurance providers with record profits in the first quarter of this year, like even after the ACA, it hasn't really restricted these companies from making more and more profits every year. So Humana, Anthem, Cigna, and United Health were making top profits.
And isn't one of those looking to buy out one of the other ones?
Yeah.
Don't
Oh,
remember?
Everybody's buying out everybody
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah.
Great sign.
I mean, we might have a national healthcare system only because there's gonna be like 2 healthcare
Right.
providers.
Right. And every other industrial country in the world has some form of universal health care, including many with some form of single payer, except for the United States. So why don't we have it here? Probably the lobbying power of the insurance and pharmaceutical companies does not exist in other developed countries like it does here. Profits continue to rise in these industries while our premiums and deductibles continue to increase. And there's a lot of talk about it, but I don't see, like Debbie Stabenow was talking about the prices of pharmaceuticals, but she didn't really propose like a plan to stop this rise. She has to decrease Medicare eligibility to 55, but that really won't do anything to help our maternal mortality rate or the infant mortality rate or the rise that we see in these prices.
Well, I'm sure most of you know that we are the only country that allows pharmaceuticals to market their products on TV
advertise.
and all of those sorts of things. I mean, the amount that they spend on marketing their products is gigantic.
It's
And
bigger
if
than what
we
they
would
spend in
just
R&D.
pass legislation to say that they could no longer do that, that would go a long way to cutting their costs.
Right. And there's a myth out there that free market works best, but as everyone in here probably knows that we don't see that trickle down effect here. and our premiums just keep going up while health coverage industries make record profits. And here's that slide that I got from PNHP. Just health insurance company CEOs are making tens of millions of dollars a year, while the majority of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency now. And also, we see our prescription drug spending, like I said earlier, just keeps going
That's
up.
insane.
So,
I mean, I'm sorry, but
and
that's just
it's
crazy.
it is.
And the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan just got like a huge bonus. What was it? 13 million, 30 million,
So.
13 million. Yeah, even though profits have gone or premiums have gone up like an average of is it 10 or 15%.
And they seem to be really taking the market over in Michigan.
Oh, they have.
Yeah.
They definitely are.
And you know, actually, this is a just one point too, because I think it's something that came up too recently. It's not in the common challenges, but we should bring it up. Which is a lot of people will say, well, you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield isn't evil; they're a nonprofit. I've seen this a lot of
Not
you know.
anymore.
Well, maybe you could speak to exactly what they are, because there are, you know, the idea of the Blue Crosses were that they would be nonprofits, so they have to have like charities on their board. They're like, you know, like Catholic priests or whatever on their board and stuff, and they don't have shareholders, so therefore supposedly that's like was like supposed to be, you know, like America's version of socialized medicine. But the reality is, of course, that you see that they're run exactly like for-profit companies in their advertising and stuff.
3 years ago, they won the ability to become for-profit in Michigan, and as a part of that, they negotiated a sum of money that would go into a foundation to meet healthcare needs. But we got so much less than any other state. They've done that in a whole lot of other states, and they have huge foundations. But what we got was just a pittance of whatever we, you know, because we didn't have the will at the state level, legislatively, or in the governor's office or whatever, to truly negotiate that the way other states did. So we have far less money coming out of that, but they are for-profit now in Michigan.
And they'll say that they had to do that, and I've heard them say and said on their behalf that they had to do that, otherwise they couldn't compete with the for-profits, which is, of course, how neoliberalism
They have
works.
always been the elephant in the room in Michigan.
And being a nonprofit, they don't have a limit on how much they can pay their CEO, right? Or
No.
different bonuses.
Well, they didn't really have.
They should.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are so unregulated except in the Medicaid and Medicare and VA programs, where the government has a heavier hand in being able to do that. CMS, in negotiating with the other systems and the insurance systems and pharmaceuticals, has had little ability to bring them in.
I would say just one more thing. I mean, going along with the prescription drug thing is also tying. You could use this tying to also the opioid epidemic that we have,
Yeah.
and that
That's
you know
right.
people are being given fentanyl or whatever at this obscene rate, and that, you know, if they had the proper care, you know, they wouldn't have to be going through these. They wouldn't be suffering and having to go through this debilitating pain or whatever. If you have the treatment right up front.
Right.
So
You're
I don't know if
treating
that's
the cause
something
of the
later.
pain.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Eric and Sarah, maybe for this next portion, we could ask people what they hear about not doing it, and then make sure that we cover all of these things. But let's get it to be a little more interactive.
Oh,
You
yeah.
want to start? Yeah. Asking people?
Oh, yeah, well, if, I don't know if Sarah wanted, if this was the last slide or
This
not,
is
but yeah,
done,
for the,
yeah.
okay, cool, great, well, then I'll just come to the front then with some notes. I'm gonna talk about some of the common challenges and the perspective we hear from people, and then we'll see what you guys are hearing and what you have to say. So I'm just gonna sneak around to the front real quick.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, thank you guys.
Thank you very much. Projector. Okay, great. So, we'll take a quick 15-20 minute whirlwind conversation about some of the pushback we're hearing, and I'll start with some of the topics that we've already heard, and, you know, you guys feel free to jump in. So one of the things we hear a lot, like we talked about with union, people say, I like my plan, Well, the question is, what is it that you like about your plan? Do you like paying co-pays, premiums, deductibles, or is it what you like going to your healthcare provider, where you'll still be able to go see, and then if they're out of town, you'll get to go see someone else for a change, instead of having to wait for an in-network provider to come, who would have the time slot to be able to fit you in there. So what you find is people don't necessarily like the bills and the baggage of a plan and the restrictions of having a network. It's that they might like their specific doctor that they've maybe been with for a number of years.
And Derek, there's one other thing that is under that is that a lot of people are getting surprise bills, that they are in the hospital and somebody out of their network treats them because they are there and they need that treatment, but then they get charged for that. So more and more I hear from people who are getting surprise bills.
Well, that's what happened to me. I had some back pain in just a local clinic, and they ran it. They said, "Oh, your card's good," or "You're fine." And then about 3 or 4 months later, I got a bill in the mail for $120.
Wow.
Well, I paid my copay, and I was asking them, "Well, what's the bill?" "Oh, we're not sure." And I said, "Well, how do you not know?" "Well, we'll see what happens."
Well, the point to speak to that is people will talk about receiving bills for treatments that their insurer will tell them, well, you don't have to pay that, we're paying that. Well, is that how you should treat all your bills? Just assume someone else is paying it and let it sit on your table? Or, it's just that's not a good way to take care of care.
As someone who currently has a plan that I like, my rebuttal to that would be, what if you lose your job and you lose your plan? And I recently had a condition caused partially by work-related stress where I couldn't walk and had trouble getting to work, so I was in fear of losing my job and losing the treatment that would get me back on my feet. So I don't think anyone, even if you have a nice plan right then, should take it for granted that it's going to stick around. And I don't think anyone should be fearful of losing their job because it would mean not having health care.
And even if you have, my husband worked for Ford Motor Company, we always had excellent care. I've had 4 cancers, and I'll never forget the first one that I had. I argued, and my physicians argued with my insurance company, who kept wanting, first they wanted a second opinion, then they wanted a third opinion, and then they weren't sure that they wanted to pay for it until my doctors and I just got on our high horse and said, we're doing it and you're paying for it, and then they did. But when you have things like that, the stress of just having it and then having to argue with what you thought was very good health care in order to get something treated as life-threatening as uterine ovarian cancer, you just get the feeling that what they really wanted you to do was die, and then they wouldn't have to pay anything, kind of thing. That's the way I felt, and that's what I said whenever I complained.
Yeah, people are not, this is not always the right thing to bring up depending what crowd you're talking to. But the reality is that health insurance doesn't make sense. When you come right down to it. Yeah. Auto insurance, maybe. Homeowners insurance, sure. Because you're essentially pooling against something that happens to a minority of the people in the pool, right? It's not predestined that every single car is going to crash. Every single home is at some point going to burn down, right? Or almost all of us, unless we, suddenly get killed or die all of a sudden, at a young while we're still in the prime of our lives and healthy, which is not most people. Most of us are going to need to go to the doctor. Most of us will need insurance. So the reality is, the reason Blue Cross Blue Shield can't operate as a true nonprofit is because there's no way to make it as a business. You know what I mean? It has to be done profitably. And once you get to that, you have to start doing things like what happened to Margie. Basically, they employ huge numbers of people whose job it is to try to stall, delay claims. They know somebody's sick. They know they might be terminally ill. They can see, they have, actuarial sheets. They can see how much money they personally would be responsible for saving if they delayed treatment and then somebody died. So then they don't have to spend any money on their health care because they're dead. Now you're talking about funeral costs instead, right? And then they get bonuses that all adds up, and you can see quarterly how much money you saved the company by delaying or stalling care or whatever. So, and that's how they make their profit margins. That's where the money comes from to pay $13 or $30 or $40 billion to CEOs to build these sparkling new, headquarters, to have these, impeccably produced commercials that are on every single commercial break, it seems like, on TV. They have to do that by denying care.
I urge everyone to read Wendell Potter. If they aren't familiar with Wendell Potter, he used to work for Aetna and is scathing about exactly what Eli is talking about.
It was his job.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the few people who quit because he couldn't live with himself.
Mm-hmm.
That was how he made a nice big salary.
Certainly, they make a lot of money by denying care. They call themselves healthcare providers, but they're healthcare deniers.
I mean, if you work at Jets Pizza, what kind of business model would you have if, for every 10 customers who place an order, like, 2 of them go in and they go to pick up their pizza and you say, I'm sorry, you come up with some loophole as to why, like, you take their money but you can't give them a pizza.
We don't think you really need this pizza right now.
Right,
You don't look hungry enough.
But you already paid, so we're gonna keep the money. Right.
But anyway, so that also gets to the pushback where we've said healthcare is a human right. People will say, well, I really think it's a human right. Well, first of all, it's outlined in the preamble of our Constitution to provide for the general welfare, and courts have affirmed that Congress can raise money to do that. In the Declaration of Independence, we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But then you just get down to the nuts and bolts of it. Even people who would push back on this, if they didn't have health care and you get to a catastrophic incident, you're going to take yourself to an emergency room and assume that someone's there to take care of you because you think that everyone has the right to care in the event of an emergency. And so we are already, even those who would push back, some of the strongest pushback against this, have to recognize that they themselves act like care is a universal right. Unless they would advocate for denying people in emergency rooms, which I guess some of them would.
Yes. And I'm not so sure that we weren't headed in that direction in the last couple of years.
Certainly. And there are a lot of nightmare stories sort of around that issue.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that does push into the healthcare isn't a right, sort of gets into some more pushback we get where people say, I don't want to pay for someone else's healthcare. Well, we're already paying for 75 million people's healthcare through Medicaid and CHIP, the Child Health Insurance Program. Another 50 million through Medicaid, so you're at 125 million there, like 55 million for Medicare, and then so another 10 million through the VA, you're at 140 million Americans out of 350 million Americans that we're paying for. That's not including every public worker's health care, from legislators to firemen and public teachers. And then, just to get to the issue of the emergency rooms again, we spend about $50 billion, there's about $50 billion in annual unrecouped costs that taxpayers are picking up on that. If you want to pay for people's health care, we're already paying for everyone else's roads, hopefully there's schools, potentially, supposedly our clean water, and certainly we're all paying for a socialized military, so I think that we could also invest in a socialized healthcare system.
And when they say they don't want to pay for people, through the emergency room, people may get in the hospital, but the kind of care that some people are getting, we have stories all the time about hospitals taking someone who doesn't have insurance, and for a long time, Medicaid, the same sort of thing is that, well, most people would stay in the hospital this many days to do it, but they pushed you out early. We even had people who were put on Coumadin when they went in, and you need Coumadin to be, your blood work to be followed. And what they did was they came into the hospital room and said, well, you're getting out at 3, and here's a list of places you can call who may be able to follow it. And almost all of the numbers on there were not good. That's the kind of care we were giving whenever we thought these people are not worthy.
Fair.
Yeah, I use care, yeah.
And that gets to the point that a lot of people don't realize, that I didn't realize until I spoke with Sarah, because she's a nurse. Insurance companies have their own internal lists of, they know to themselves how long it should take you to get better from a certain illness. And once you go beyond the 2 to 3 days or 2 to 3 weeks, they're just really doing their best to push you out of that bed to fill it up. Because like the hospitality industry of hospitals and then for-profit prisons, they fill their beds as fast as they can, and then when they try to get them, out to the next person. So.
And this also connects to the opioid too, because we talked to a lot of people who've had really awful experiences with substance addiction. We have a person that we know whose girlfriend died of alcoholism. She just, drank herself to death. And he finally was able to get her. It's hard enough to get people with substance abuse to go to rehab. Then you got to figure out how to pay for it. And insurance usually, in this case, her insurance paid for something like 4 days in detox. And I think most mental health professionals, substance abuse professionals, would say minimum of 28 to really get healthy and get recovered from an addiction. So it didn't help her at all.
You go into the hospital and you say that you have an opioid problem. They'll give you a sheet of paper that's been through the copier so many times it's almost unreadable. And they'll give you directions on what to do. They tell you to stay warm, avoid drugs, avoid caffeine, avoid cigarettes. So they want you not only to be going through withdrawal from the opiate, they also want you going through caffeine withdrawal and nicotine withdrawal at the same time. But this is their idea of sending you to rehab. This piece of paper. This is what you do. And I know that from personal experience. So it's totally unrealistic and totally unhelpful. But that's the only rehab my insurance will pay for, is that sheet of paper.
Mm.
It's incredibly ridiculous. This idea that people don't deserve it, like that people perhaps on Medicaid or Medicare. Medicare, those are seniors by and large, or people who need like really catastrophic or disabled, and so they spend their lives, most of the time, spend their whole lives paying into the system. When it comes to Medicaid, 60% of people on Medicaid work currently, and 80% of them live in a household where where someone's working. So there's only 4.8 million people who don't work and receive Medicaid. It sounds like a lot to someone, general American doesn't earn $30,000 a year, half of the workers, but, so to pay for $638 million might sound like a lot of our $4.8 trillion budget, but for someone in Michigan who earns $50,000 a year, that's $2 of your annual income tax that you're paying to support those who receive Medicaid and don't work. It's 0.015% of our federal budget.
And we should, the work requirement that they're going to be voting on in Michigan very, very soon. How many of you saw what Minnesota just found out? Anybody read that article? Minnesota did a study to see how much it would cost them to implement the work requirement. They found out they would have to put in 300 new workers and that they would spend more money on administration than they were going to save on the work requirement.
Well, it's been the same thing they've been doing with some of the states that have been doing the drug testing for
exactly
unemployment and such, and they found that
the same.
they saved $5,000 and they spent $50,000 or $60,000.
The reality is most of the people who are supposedly not working on Medicaid are people who are disabled, and aren't necessarily like in treatment, but they have untreated mental illness or, just simply untreated physical ailments, or substance addiction. They're not gonna start working just because there's a requirement. It's vanishingly small. It's tiny. This is like the voter fraud canard.
I'm going to bring up that there is also some racial bias in this Medicaid kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
I want to tell you one story. The head of the Kellogg Foundation was a black woman, very articulate and everything else, and she talks about when she had her first child and she went into the hospital, they put her in the hall. They assumed because she was black that she was on Medicaid and they weren't going to give her a room. That she was just in the hallway and that sort of thing. And when her doctor came in, he blew the roof. And they told the doctor, well, we thought she was on Medicaid. So they were not going to give her the same kind of care that they would give someone who had a different insurance.
And I mean, this has parallels with sort of the immigrants' rights issues of like, are we going to be checking people's IDs before we go into an emergency room, or are we going to make someone prove they have eligibility when they're in a hospital about to give birth, or perhaps, dying of a heart attack?
Well, the first thing they ask for in the emergency room is what type of insurance you have before the doctor will even see you most of the time. So of course that influences the type of care.
Eric, one other argument I hear a lot is, maybe it's because I come from a Catholic family, so it's all about your personal morality is, well, why should I pay for a smoker? Why should I pay for someone who drank too much? Why should I pay for someone who had an addiction in the highest resulting physical problems, why should I take on the burden of, your bad, what they view as bad moral choices?
Because that's what Christ would do?
Yeah, well, it's far too basic. I think the best is, but I bear the risk, the fact that you're a downhill skier. I bear the risk that you
text and drive.
Yeah, that you text and drive. I bear the risk that you own a sports car that will crumble on the smallest of impacts. I mean, people don't realize that, well, you know what, you're a risk too. Unless you're literally sitting home on your couch, in which case you're a risk for heart disease.
Right.
We all bear the risks of each other's behavior. So,
to get to what Roseanne said, I mean, the issue of public health being an overarching issue where things like, oh, I got my health. It's not like $1 in your pocket where it's something that you can just share with someone. I mean, we're all part of the same ecosystem, we're sharing our microbiomes in just the air of this room as we exhale. So unless you're just going to sequester yourself off from society in some sort of medical safe room,
well, think of all the people getting their water shut off. And folks are like, well, okay, they don't pay their bill. I don't care if their water's shut off. Okay, those folks with their water shut off who are now more at risk for hepatitis go to work at their sub-minimum wage job at Burger King, and you go to Burger King, and they were just touching all your food. So everything's connected.
Public health implications.
Yeah, everything's connected.
Absolutely. So we talked about the eligibility. Some people will say, like it was such a pain trying to get on Medicaid or trying to get the VA to recognize that I actually wasn't that and did incur this injury. All of those eligibility requirements are going to be gone. We're all going to be able to use the same health system. You're not going to have to. We talked about the waste in money, but also the waste in time of just running everyone through the gamut of finding out what network you're in, if you're in a network at all, and if you're not slamming the door on their face.
Yeah, I mean, there's the applying to be on Medicaid is like a full-time job in of itself. And again, this is the thing to emphasize to people is this is automatic enrollment. You're born, you're in it. You get a card. That's it.
If you could just speak real quick, Eli, because I know that this seems really relevant here. When we talked about the card chips, when you were in Germany, did you have one of those when you lived there?
Yeah. I lived in Germany for 4 years. I had a kid born there. Again, Germany isn't a complete single-payer universal healthcare system, but it's very close in that it has an enormous public option, actually 2 sort of public options, and then it has some private plans that you can opt for, or that employers sometimes will opt for to increase their employees' chances of coming. But it's not like you aren't taken care of with everything you need. And so we just had a card. They had this is 15 years ago. They had chip technology in a card, and you just go to any doctor you want. We didn't know who to go to. We just went to the pediatrician that was right around the corner from our house because it was the closest, and we didn't have a car. And then when it was time to give birth, my then wife, we picked this like really hippy dippy midwife clinic that was like all natural, and it was pretty intense. But in the end, I mean, we could have gone anywhere we wanted. We went there, and it cost us like 30 euros total, right? And the average birth cost something like, where everything goes smoothly, I think it's like 20,000, 10, 20,000, something like that, or more. And again, you just get there, and we qualified because if she's was an EU citizen. So, but again, just a card. You take it anywhere. It's got all your information. And that's all you need to do.
And that brings up the issue that people push back and say, well, free market decide the cost and the access to healthcare. But when doctors are in network, they're really only competing with other doctors in their network for other patients in the network. They're not competing with someone down the street who treats patients from another network. And so if we're really going to have actual competition among physicians, healthcare providers, and for people to go so speak both with their feet on what type of care they want to get, you should be able to go to any doctor.
Free markets are good for wants, not needs. The way we organized our democracy was, things like schools and We didn't do healthcare, unfortunately. But schools and roads and infrastructure and that sort of thing, it all seemed correct that we pool our money and send it back out and take care of things. But we didn't do it for that. So the free market was not meant to meet everyone's needs. A free market works whenever you can compare. You don't go out and compare and shop. I didn't go on the internet to see how much a Whipple would cost when I had pancreatic cancer. I mean, it wasn't something I would even think of doing. Now, if I needed an operation, I needed it now, and you go where your doctor tells you to go. That shopping for healthcare is a big thing now. Compare. There's all of these sites. And that's okay if it's something that you can look at and do in the long range. But when you're under stress and you need it now, there's no shopping.
When you're in the middle of cardiac arrest.
Yeah. And even, the vehicle will take you, the EMS will take you to the closest hospital, not the one you want to go to.
Yeah. And then there's the problem, people keep saying Medicare for all. But Medicare is expensive. I just recently got onto it, and first month they took $150 out of my Social Security. I have to pay 10% of my drugs. I have to pay co-pays. I have to pay all of this. And this is Medicare that I've been paying into since I was 15 years old. And I also am qualified to get the assistance. So supposedly Medicaid is going to pick up the cost of my Part B and this, that, and the other thing. But they decided that I had applied too late, although they told me when I went earlier that it was too early. It's going to be like 4 months before I'll even be able to go back to the doctor because of the costs.
That is something that people bring up, which is Medicare. You have to get Medicare Advantage plans that only cover like 80% of your costs. You're still getting these premiums or co-pays.
Right. That's why it's improved, expanded Medicare for all.
Through that HR 676, the House bill it's called expanded and improved Medicare for all.
And the standard bill is the same.
Yeah, and the real goal is, a national health insurance program, a single payer system, making sure everyone can go to a doctor when they want. But Medicare, expanded and improved Medicare for all is a vehicle for that. And so it would actually, Medicare would get better because people would have 100% coverage without any of those costs. And you would have the whole pool of young, healthy people paying into it the way that it's intended to be, so that you have the largest possible negotiating pool is the nation, or if not the world, but that's some real future thing.
And also, just real quick, the Robbie bill, the way it would work at the state level, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, we can't cover everybody in the state, that's too expensive. We don't need to, because basically that bill would be the supplemental insurance for Tina, for example. You wouldn't need to wait for Medicaid. Like, MyCare would just fill that in. And so for a lot of veterans too, you don't get full coverage. It kind of depends like what your combat experience actually was, as Sarah could say. So this would fill in for the rest of what you don't get at the VA, right? So it doesn't actually have to cover everybody in the state. It covers the people who aren't on Medicare, Medicaid, and VA and CHIP, and then it fills in.
Federal money,
right.
State money.
I don't want to miss your question.
Oh yeah, no, I had a question. I think it's largely perception. I guess a lot of these arguments are, but one thing that I always come across, I've always been kind of dumbfounded on with people say, Canadians, it's like the Canadian style healthcare, and they hate their healthcare. And there are Canadians that come here to get healthcare. I was wondering if you could speak to that point.
Absolutely. So our current wait times are sort of in the middle of advanced nations. What Canadians have a wait time for is elective procedures, whereas they still push people through for urgent care, and they don't have significant. They might even have shorter urgent care times, or it's just not significantly longer than ours.
Yeah, we have wait times now.
Yeah,
you want to get to see a specialist?
You don't have health insurance. You're not really waiting. You're just not going. Which includes, it gets to the topic of rationing care, which is the idea that Eli said he has health insurance and he still doesn't go unless it's an absolute emergency, just for the sake of the fact that they're trying to keep their costs within a reasonable amount. So
And we ration care in this country for years and years, but just not giving care to people. I mean, you know, that is a form of rationing, is not covering people.
I think also it's largely a myth.
Yeah.
Canadians are flooding the United States for their health care. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is a huge healthcare hub right now, and obviously adjacent to the Canadian border.
Well, we're in Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, part of what people don't seem to realize is one, they're coming here for elective situations, you know, and two, a lot of border city hospitals are part of or have agreements with Canadian's national healthcare system.
Right.
So if you have a heart attack in Windsor or a really, really bad situation in Windsor, rather than fly you to London or even perhaps Toronto, they bring you to the DMC.
That's a good point.
And I know it's true in Buffalo as well. A lot of Canadians come to America in emergent healthcare systems simply because it's really the closest center. And they have an agreement with the Canadian government that they'll treat these people at the apothecary of the National Health System in Canada. So it's really kind of BS that there's this flood of people coming over because they'll die under the Canadian healthcare system. It's absolute bullshit.
And the
it
polling
just
in
bugs
Canada
me.
is clear that people are strongly
Yeah.
supportive.
Yeah, if everybody loved our healthcare system, why aren't they changing to it? It doesn't
Right.
seem to happen. In fact, you see massive political unrest when someone tries to undo a national healthcare system like in Britain or Canada.
I was going to say, in Great Britain, you know, you've had, you know, Labour and the Tories trying to gut the NHS for decades, and they still weren't able to do it because people said, no, we like this.
Even Tory voters in Britain will see the NHS as something definingly British, and they will not.
Even Thatcher couldn't get rid of it.
So
And I won't say I have friends who do this, but let's just say I've heard about people who have friends who go over to Canada to buy pharmaceuticals.
Absolutely.
my wife does that.
Oh, okay, well, you'll say it.
Yeah, my wife does that
I won't
because
say
she's on a medication that
Yeah.
without insurance would cost us $1,000 a month. With insurance, it costs us $600 a month. Through this Canadian pharmacy she uses, it costs us $300 a month.
And I'm only 30, but when I was growing up, I remember it was a political stunt where lawmakers used to lead bus tours across the border to Mexico or Canada, and I've heard Debbie Stabenow brag about taking people across the border to get cheaper medicine in Canada. So if we're going to talk about who's going in which direction to get what care, we certainly have to mention drug prices.
I once had a couple at one of the places that I talked who moved to England because the cancer medications that they needed were so expensive that they just sold their house and moved to England.
Yeah, we have a guy we organize with whose father had AIDS and moved to England because of that. We're close to taking a break. One thing I just wanted to point out is that the no, I'm losing my point now. Maybe we should just take a break. And if I think about it, we'll bring it up.
I'm just saying real quick, one of the things I really want to bring up is when people say, I agree, I love it, of course we need single payer, but it's just not possible.
Yeah.
Well, how is it, if it's so impossible, how is it that Nepal and Botswana have it and America doesn't? Those are some of the poorest countries in the world. When we rolled out Medicare in 65, they had something like, in 1965 rather, they had something like 99% enrollment after a year, and with index cards, you know, you would think that with the glory of the internet and our interconnected social relationships, we could all figure out how to sign each other up for this if need be. And then what people mean is that it's politically, they feel it's politically infeasible given our current climate. But to a certain extent, that's what this campaign is about, is shifting the Overton window. I mean, when I talk to people, it's not, do you have a healthcare horror story? It's generally, what is your healthcare horror story? My coworker the other day said, well, I don't really have one. It involves my parents. They kicked him off their health insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield did, because he wasn't going to school, and they tripled their premiums. It's like, yeah, that's a horror story. He just didn't really recognize that he was entwined in it that way. So,
And government of, by, and for the people. If we aren't going to do by the people, then this is not a democracy. That we have to believe that the people's will can take precedent if we join together and express our will. But the other thing I want to say is that we have to remember that democracy is hard work, that even if we get this, keeping it, we need to know that it will be an ongoing struggle, to be able to keep it, and that you can't let down your guard and think that, well, now we're here. We did that in 2010, obviously, when we got the ACA, and look how quickly it has been undermined when a different person comes in to the leadership. It is just incredible to me about the numbers of things that have been done. And certainly the ACA was not perfect and needed to be improved in moving to Medicare for all, but what we had got dismantled very quickly. And we can't forget that it's really important to keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah. I talked to Alyssa Stocking, who is the Democrat. She's one of the Democratic candidates for Michigan 8 representative. She's like, I will not sign on for single payer. We have to go through public option first because there's a lot of, well, what she really meant to say was there's a lot of Republican voters who are scared of socialized medicine. And because she's basically running as a Republican with a D next to her name, she was worried what they're thinking. But she said, we need to pass public option first. But I think they're not they're just going to cut that right out. No. They're just going to.
Sure. And I think that, what we have to say to people is that why isn't it the time?
Yeah.
I mean, I really think we need to push for what we need, and that is a healthcare system that covers everything. When anybody says that we have to do that, I mean, I argued that with Peter's staff and Stavenaw's staff, several times recently about the time to the public option was 2010.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, we have come a long way. We've learned a lot, and I think you need to get out and listen to people because people want a healthcare system that works for everyone. And a public option is never going to do it.
And real quick, I feel it's worth mentioning that these private insurers have huge war chests for things like advertising and for lobbying, and they're more than willing to take a loss on profits to undercut a public option to make their plan seem more attractive to people until we do get the public option, and then we're just right back where we started.
Yeah, because they can, moving to 80-20 for their profits, the 20% profits, what they did was they started to take over some things, and now they can charge to themselves as being a health care issue. This isn't administrative. We're working on people's health. And so then they roll in that money. So I think it is really important that we may have to do like the kids did yesterday. Say, if you take NRA money, we're not going to vote for you. We may have to say, if you're going to take insurance company money, we're not going to vote for you.
Yep.
We've done that. I've been arrested 6 times
doing
that. And it doesn't seem to penetrate.
But now we have a model out there that seems to be catching fire, so that if it could catch fire.
All right, no, that's great. Everyone's info was really helpful today, and we're going to take a quick 10-15 minute break, I believe, here.
10 minutes.
And then Laura's going to lead us in some direct canvassing training.
All right. Thank you, Eric.